All right, this is Austin Fula, and I am presenting on task 1 of task 2 for my team's term project. And without further ado, let me get into it. All right, so for task 1, we are looking at HOT location recommendations. And on this slide, I just have a quick outline of what I'm going to go through in my presentation. Please bear with me, I only have 5 or so minutes, so I think I need to skim through some of this pretty quickly, but hopefully I can cover everything. First off, I examined the I-40 HOV/congestion management study, and while this doesn't directly discuss HOT lanes, HOV and HOT have a lot in common, and there's some useful traffic demand data in this, so I think there's a lot to gain from looking through this study. Next thing I'm going to look at is some other studies and where they recommend to install HOT lanes. The third thing I'm going to look at is potential HOV to HOT conversions. And then the fourth slide will be my implementation plan of where HOV and where HOT should be installed. And then finally, I'm going to look at additional considerations for the study area. And I know it might be a little hard to see, but down below I have the project study area outlined in this line. It's a little rotated, so it might be a little weird to look at, but we're looking at HOT lanes between the Chapel Hill area through Research Triangle Park and into Raleigh. All right, so the first thing I looked at was the I-40 HOV/congestion management study. And below are a few just key takeaways, and not really any order from the study, but key takeaways that are very useful going forward with this HOT study. First of all, HOV facilities, the minimum threshold for building them is 500 vehicles per mile in a segment, and if there's less than that, it's just not worth doing it. Or if they're less than that, there's general use lane drivers can have major issues with them, which is called empty lane syndrome, where basically drivers sit in congestion and then look over into the HOV lane and see an empty lane, and this results in very frustrated drivers and people wanting to remove the lane. The highest demand in this study area is between Research Triangle Park and I-540, which is right in this area. The recommendation out of this study was that HOT lanes, the revenues do not justify the cost. They didn't go into any more detail than this, but this was a bullet in one of the tables. I'm not sure how much analysis they performed to come up with this recommendation, but I think it's something good to keep in the back of our heads while looking at this. And then finally, their recommendation was to develop planning framework and funding plan for a 100-mile HOV network, which is this right here. And also in this table is the projected volumes for HOV lanes in the study area outlined in this orange box. All right, next thing is where to potentially install HOT lanes. The first obvious point is where there's congestion. If there's no congestion, there's no need to install them because people just can drive in the general use lane without issue. Next thing is there excess capacity in HOV lanes. If there's excess capacity in HOV lanes, and then there could be extra room for tolled vehicles to pay to be in that lane. Additionally, you can create capacity by making HOV 3+ instead of 2+. And then finally, like I mentioned before, if there's public concern about HOV utilization, as in the empty lane syndrome, if they see an empty lane, people are not happy, and instead of converting it back to general use, you could potentially convert it to HOT. All right, and so based on the I-40 study, I thought we are treating this as an HOV to HOV conversion. So moving forward, it's going to be treated as HOV is going to be installed everywhere. And then a quick note, I didn't research into this much, but I think going forward is useful to think about is what are the legal and institutional challenges of making this conversion from HOT to HOT. And then finally, once again, this is just another point of HOT is best implemented when there's excess capacity in HOV, so there's room for extra tolled vehicles. All right, so I decided the best way to break this study area up was in 2 sections, one west of Research Triangle Park and one east of Research Triangle Park. And my recommendation is to first install HOT to the west of Research Triangle Park because there's less demand for HOV, so more there's a higher chance of empty lane syndrome where there's just not enough vehicles using it. So to keep public views on this as good as possible, this should be HOT first to keep these lanes fully utilized. Honestly, I feel like they should just both be HOT from the get-go, but if there's not funding or if there's concern about doing both, then just the west. And then this could be HOV first and then potentially convert to HOT. And then finally, I just wanted to look at additional considerations. This was a small, just term project. Obviously, there's tons and tons of work that needs to go into where HOT should be installed and every little detail that goes into this. So here's some additional considerations. So roadway geometry, I think, can almost entirely be the same as what was recommended in the I-40 HOV study. There might be slight need for some bigger enforcement shoulders and a few things, but in general, it's going to be very, very similar. So we're just assuming that. The next thing, there should be some revenue projection, which I did not look into for these HOT lanes. So is it going to make money? How much can they charge? And all these details. And if it's not going to make money, it still might be installed, but this just needs to be considered before they build these lanes. And then finally, the initial study was done in around 2003, and since then, despite large growth projections, the economic downturn really made vehicles miles traveled nationwide go very flat for almost a 10-year period. So I think demands need to be updated to make sure that there is actually demand for HOV and HOT in this area. And then finally, I just want to note that along the lines of everything else, there's just further research needed before installing HOT lanes, but my general summary is that I think they should be recommended. All right, hopefully that wasn't too long. I see that was around 7 minutes, and I guess if you have any questions, please post it on the message board or contact me directly via my student email. All right, thank you.